When wealthy real estate mogul Edmund Blackwell's own daughter defied his empire, he unleashed a storm of vengeance that would shatter lives across the city. But on one rain-soaked night, when a single father witnessed a mother and child cast into the streets like broken dolls, his simple act of kindness would ignite a war between ordinary hearts and ruthless power that no one saw coming. The rain hammered against Daniel Carter's windshield like bullets of ice, each drop exploding in a symphony of chaos that matched the turmoil churning in his chest. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel as he navigated through the storm-darkened streets of downtown, the city's neon signs bleeding their colors into the night like wounded angels. At 34, Daniel had learned that life rarely offered second chances. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the universe was holding its breath. "Dad, are you okay?" Tommy's voice cut through the storm's rage from the passenger seat, his 12-year-old face etched with concern that no child should carry. The boy's school uniform was still crisp despite the long day, his backpack clutched against his chest like armor against an uncertain world. Daniel forced a smile, the same one he'd perfected over the past 3 years since Sarah's death. "Just thinking about your future, buddy. Mr. Henderson said the scholarship interview went well today." Tommy nodded, but his eyes held shadows that mirrored his father's. "What if I don't get it, Dad? What if we can't afford—" "Hey." Daniel's voice carried the weight of every sacrifice he'd made, every double shift at the construction site, every sleepless night spent calculating bills. "You're going to that prep school, Tommy. I promised your mom and I keep my promises." The words hung between them like a sacred vow, heavy with the memory of Sarah's final moments, when she'd made Daniel swear to give their son every opportunity she'd never had. The scholarship to Westfield Academy wasn't just about education. It was about breaking the cycle of barely getting by that had defined the Carter family for generations. As they turned onto Maple Street, their modest neighborhood came into view, a collection of working-class dreams, held together by determination and hope. Daniel had bought their small 2-story house with Sarah when Tommy was just a baby, back when the future seemed bright and endless. Now, 3 years after the cancer had stolen his wife, the house felt both like a sanctuary and a reminder of everything he'd lost. But as Daniel pulled into his driveway, the familiar comfort of home was shattered by a scene that would haunt him forever. Across the street, under the pale glow of a flickering streetlight, a woman knelt in the rain beside a pile of belongings that had been carelessly thrown onto the sidewalk. Her dark hair clung to her face like liquid silk, and even from a distance Daniel could see her shoulders shaking. Whether from cold fear or despair, he couldn't tell. Beside her, a little girl no more than 6 years old pressed herself against her mother's side, her small frame trembling as she clutched a stuffed rabbit that was quickly becoming soaked. "What's happening over there?" Tommy asked, his young voice tight with concern. Before Daniel could answer, the front door of the house burst open, and a large man in an expensive suit emerged, his face twisted with cruel satisfaction. Behind him stood another figure, a younger man in a black coat, whose presence seemed to drain warmth from the air itself. "I told you what would happen if you missed another payment." The landlord's voice boomed across the street, cutting through the storm like a blade. "You've had 3 months, Sophia. 3 months of my generosity, and this is how you repay me." The woman. Sophia looked up with eyes that held depths of pain Daniel recognized from his own mirror. "Please, Mr. Garrett. My daughter is sick. I just need 1 more week. The hospital bills." "Not my problem." Garrett's laugh was harsh and metallic. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to play the victim. There are consequences for running away from your responsibilities." The man in the black coat stepped forward, and Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. There was something wrong about the way this stranger moved, something predatory and calculated that had nothing to do with unpaid rent. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside," the man said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Away from prying eyes. "No." Sophia's voice cracked like a whip, and she pulled her daughter closer. "We're leaving. Right now." "I'm afraid that's not an option," the stranger replied, producing a phone from his coat. "Mr. Blackwell has been very clear about his wishes regarding his wayward daughter." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Blackwell. Everyone in the city knew that name, Edmund Blackwell, the real estate magnate who owned half the downtown skyline and had a reputation for crushing anyone who stood in his way. But this woman, this beautiful broken woman kneeling in the rain, was his daughter. "Dad." Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Dad, are you getting out?" Daniel realized he'd already opened his car door, rain immediately soaking through his work shirt. Something deep inside him had awakened something that had been sleeping since Sarah's death, the part of him that couldn't stand by and watch injustice unfold. "Stay in the car, Tommy," he said quietly, his voice carrying a steel that surprised even him. "But Dad, stay in the car." Daniel crossed the street with purpose, each step deliberate and measured. The rain seemed to part around him as he approached the group, and he saw Sophia's eyes widen as she took in his tall frame and the determined set of his jaw. "Evening," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made both Garrett and the stranger turn to face him. "Seems like you folks are having some trouble with the weather." Garrett's face flushed red with irritation. "This is private property, buddy. Move along." Daniel's gaze never wavered. "Last I checked, the sidewalk was public property." He looked down at Sophia and her daughter, his heart clenching at the fear in their eyes. "Ma'am, are you and your little girl all right?" "We're fine," Sophia whispered, but her voice betrayed the lie. Blood seeped through a bandage on her temple, and her daughter's lips had taken on a blue tinge from the cold. The stranger in the black coat stepped closer, and Daniel caught a glimpse of something metallic beneath his jacket. "I suggest you keep walking, friend. This doesn't concern you." "Funny thing about me," Daniel replied, not moving an inch. "I have a real problem with grown men threatening women and children in storms." He looked directly at Sophia. "My house is right across the street. Warm, dry, and safe. You and your daughter are welcome to it." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against concrete and the distant rumble of thunder. Daniel could feel the weight of the moment, the way the universe seemed to hold its breath as ordinary and extraordinary collided on a rain-soaked street. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," the stranger said, his hand moving closer to his jacket. Daniel's construction-hardened muscles tensed, ready for whatever came next. "Maybe not, but I know what's right." Sophia looked up at him with eyes that held storms of their own fear, hope, desperation, and something else that made Daniel's chest tighten. In that moment, he saw past the expensive clothes and into the soul of a woman who was drowning and grasping for anything that might save her. "We can't," she whispered. "You don't understand. They'll hurt you. They'll hurt your family." "Let me worry about that," Daniel said softly, extending his hand. "Right now, your little girl needs to get warm and dry. Everything else can wait." Thunder crashed overhead as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the choice being made. Sophia stared at Daniel's outstretched hand like it was a lifeline thrown into churning waters, and for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, the world balanced on the edge of decision. Then with trembling fingers, she reached up and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, Daniel felt something electric pass between them, not just attraction, though her beauty was undeniable, but recognition. The recognition of two souls who had been tested by life and emerged scarred but unbroken. People who understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for glory or gain, but simply because they were right. "Lily," Sophia whispered to her daughter, "we're going to go with this nice man." The little girl looked up at Daniel with eyes that were far too old for her face, eyes that had seen things no child should witness. "Is it safe, Mama?" "I hope so, baby," Sophia replied, and Daniel heard the weight of desperate prayer in those 3 words. As they stood, the stranger's voice cut through the night like a blade. "This isn't over, Sophia. Your father's patience has limits, and you've already exceeded them. Running to strangers won't save you from your obligations." "The only obligation I have is to protect my daughter," Sophia replied, and Daniel heard steel beneath the exhaustion in her voice. Garrett sneered as he watched them gather the scattered belongings. "You'll be back, Sophia. They always come back when reality sets in." Daniel helped Sophia to her feet, supporting her as she swayed slightly from exhaustion and whatever injury had left blood on her temple. Her daughter pressed close to her mother's side, the stuffed rabbit clutched like a talisman against the dark. "Can you walk, to?" Daniel asked quietly. Sophia nodded, though her grip on his arm told a different story. "We don't have much," she said, gesturing to the pile of belongings. "Just some clothes and—" "We'll get it all," Daniel assured her. "Tommy," he called to his son, who had been watching from the car with wide eyes. "Come help us." Tommy emerged from the car like a young knight, answering a call to adventure, rain immediately plastering his hair to his head. Without hesitation, he began gathering clothes and books, his young face set with determination that mirrored his father's. "What's your name?" he asked Lily, as he handed her a small backpack that had been missed. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm Tommy. Do you like hot chocolate?" A tiny smile ghosted across Lily's face, the first light Daniel had seen there. "Yes." "Good," Tommy grinned. "Dad makes the best hot chocolate in the world, with extra marshmallows." As they worked to gather everything, Daniel was acutely aware of the 2 men watching from the doorway. The stranger had his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones that made the hair on Daniel's neck stand up. Whatever storm had driven Sophia from her father's house was far from over, and by helping her, he was stepping into the path of something much larger and more dangerous than unpaid rent. But as he watched Tommy carefully help Lily with her belongings, as he felt Sophia's grateful touch on his arm, Daniel knew he would make the same choice again. Some things were worth the risk. Some people were worth fighting for. The short walk across the street felt like crossing between worlds. Behind them lay whatever hell Sophia was fleeing from, and ahead lay Daniel's modest home sanctuary, built on love loss and the quiet determination taunt of a man who had learned that family wasn't always about blood. As they reached his front porch, Daniel fumbled with his keys, hyper-aware of Sophia's presence beside him. Up close, even disheveled by rain and fear, she was breathtaking. But it wasn't just her beauty that drew him. It was the strength he sensed beneath the vulnerability, the fierce protectiveness in how she held her daughter, the way she had stood up to men who clearly terrified her. "Here we are," Daniel said as the door swung open, warm air and soft lamplight spilling out into the storm. "Welcome to our home." Sophia stepped across the threshold, like someone entering a foreign country, her eyes taking in the lived-in comfort of the Carter home. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, showing happier times when Sarah was still alive. Homework was scattered across the dining room table, and the lingering scent of that morning's coffee mixed with the faint aroma of the lasagna Daniel had reheated for dinner. "It's beautiful," Sophia breathed, and Daniel heard genuine wonder in her voice. "It's home," he replied simply. "Tommy, go get some towels from the linen closet, and maybe some of your old clothes that might fit Lily." As Tommy thundered up the stairs, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood, Daniel turned to his unexpected guests. Sophia stood in his living room like a work of art that had been damaged by careless hands, beautiful and broken, and somehow made more precious by her imperfections. "Let me look at that cut," Daniel said, gently nodding toward the blood on her temple. Sophia's hand flew to the wound self-consciously. "It's nothing. Richard he got angry when I told him I wouldn't marry him." The casual way she said it, as if being struck by a man, was as normal as commenting on the weather, made rage burn in Daniel's chest. But he kept his voice level, gentle. "Angry men who hit women are cowards, and cowards always show their true colors eventually." Sophia's eyes met his, and he saw surprise there, as if kindness from a man was something foreign and unexpected. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Daniel. My father, Edmund Blackwell, he's not a man who forgives interference." "Then it's a good thing I'm not asking for his forgiveness," Daniel replied. "Right now, let's focus on getting you and Lily warm and fed. Everything else can wait until morning." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lily appeared at her mother's side, her small hand slipping into Sophia's with the automatic gesture of a child seeking comfort. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and she shivered despite the warmth of the house. "Hey there, sweetheart," Daniel said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "Are you hungry?" Lily nodded shyly, and Daniel's heart clenched at how thin she looked, how her clothes hung loose on her small frame. "Well, we can't have that," Daniel said with exaggerated seriousness. "It just so happens that I make a mean grilled cheese sandwich. And Tommy's right about the hot chocolate. It's pretty spectacular." "With marshmallows," Lily whispered. "With as many marshmallows as you want," Daniel promised, and was rewarded with another ghost of a smile. Tommy reappeared with an armload of towels and clothes, his face flushed with excitement at having guests. "I found some of my old stuff," he announced, holding up a small sweater and jeans. "They might be a little big, but they're warm." Sophia's eyes filled with tears at the simple kindness, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct that went beyond mere attraction, beyond simple human decency. This woman and her daughter had been thrown into his life by a storm, but already they felt like something precious that had been lost and found again. "The bathroom's upstairs, first door on the right," Daniel said softly. "Take your time getting cleaned up. We'll be right here when you're ready." As Sophia and Lily disappeared upstairs, Daniel and Tommy stood in the sudden quiet of their living room, listening to the storm rage outside. The normalcy of their life, homework, and dinner routines, and the comfortable rhythm of their days had been shattered in the space of minutes, replaced by something electric and dangerous and alive. "Dad," Tommy's voice was thoughtful, "are they going to stay with us?" Daniel looked at his son, this boy who was growing up too fast, who had already learned that life could steal the people you loved without warning. "I don't know, Tommy, but they're safe here tonight, and sometimes that's all any of us can ask for." "I hope they stay," Tommy said quietly. "It's been too quiet here since Mom died." The simple honesty of it hit Daniel like a physical blow. In trying to protect his son from his own grief, he had created a house that was more tomb than home, a place where they existed rather than lived. But already with Sophia and Lily upstairs, the house felt different, alive with possibility, and the particular chaos that came with family. "Let's make some food," Daniel said, ruffling Tommy's hair. "And Tommy, not a word about any of this to anyone at school, okay? Something tells me these ladies need to stay invisible for a while." As they moved into the kitchen, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. His blood ran cold as he read the simple message. "Return what belongs to Mr. Blackwell or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. Thunder crashed overhead, and Daniel deleted the message before Tommy could see it. Whatever storm had driven Sophia to his door, it was far from over. But as he heard the sound of laughter from upstairs, Lily's delighted giggle at something Tommy had said, Daniel knew that some shelters were worth defending, no matter the cost. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, while secrets and danger swirled in the shadows. And in a modest house on Maple Street, 4 lives began to intertwine in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the price of doing what's right. The smell of melting butter and grilled cheese filled the kitchen as Daniel worked at the stove, his movements practiced and sure, despite the chaos churning in his mind. The anonymous text message burned in his memory like a brand, but he forced himself to focus on the simple ritual of making food for his unexpected guests. Sometimes the most profound acts of rebellion were disguised as ordinary kindness. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, his homework spread before him, but his attention clearly elsewhere. Every few seconds, his eyes would drift toward the ceiling, where the sound of running water indicated that Sophia and Lily were finally getting warm and dry. "Dad," Tommy said quietly, his pencil tracing meaningless patterns on his math worksheet. "Why were those men being so mean to them?" Daniel flipped the sandwich in the pan, buying himself a moment to choose his words carefully. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that some people view other human beings as property to be controlled, that wealth and power could corrupt a person's soul until they forgot that love couldn't be bought or forced? Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, Tommy, and sometimes those bad choices hurt innocent people. Like how Mom got sick. The question hit Daniel in the chest like a sledgehammer. Even after 3 years, Tommy still struggled to understand why the universe had taken his mother while leaving criminals and cruel men untouched. It was a question Daniel asked himself in the dark hours of sleepless nights. Nobody. What happened to Mom was just life being unfair. What happened to Sophia and Lily tonight, that was people choosing to be cruel. There's a difference. Tommy nodded solemnly, then looked up with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. Is that why you helped them, because people were choosing to be cruel? Partly, Daniel admitted, sliding the golden sandwich onto a plate. But mostly because it was the right thing to do. Your mom always said that we're not measured by what we have, but by what we do when someone needs help. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation, and Daniel's breath caught as Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway. Cleaned up and wearing one of his old college sweatshirts that hung loose on her frame, she was even more beautiful than he'd realized. But it was the vulnerability in her eyes that made his chest tighten with protectiveness. Lily peeked out from behind her mother, swimming in one of Tommy's old sweaters, her dark hair still damp, but her face finally showing some color. The stuffed rabbit was clutched firmly in her arms, and she looked around the warm kitchen with wonder. "Feel better?" Daniel asked gently. "Much," Sophia replied, her voice soft with gratitude. "Thank you. For the clothes, for..." She gestured helplessly around the kitchen, as if trying to encompass everything he'd already given them. "For treating us like people," she finished quietly. The simple statement revealed so much about the life she'd been living that Daniel had to turn back to the stove to hide his reaction. When he composed himself, he found Tommy already pulling out chairs for their guests, his natural politeness shining through, despite the strangeness of the situation. "Hot chocolate coming right up," Daniel announced, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "And Lily, I kept my promise about the marshmallows." As they settled around the kitchen table, Daniel marveled at how quickly the space had transformed. What had been a quiet dinner for two had become something that felt almost like family. Lily's delighted gasp when she saw the mountain of marshmallows in her mug. Tommy's animated explanation of his favorite video games. Sophia's soft laughter, the first genuine joy he'd heard from her. But beneath the surface, normalcy tension hummed like a live wire. Every few minutes, Sophia's eyes would dart toward the windows, and Daniel caught her flinching at the sound of a car passing by outside. Whatever she was running from had trained her to expect danger from every shadow. "So," Daniel said carefully as they ate, "do you want to tell me what's really going on? Those men tonight, they weren't just landlords, were they?" Sophia's hand tightened around her mug, and she glanced meaningfully at Lily, who was absorbed in fishing marshmallows out of her hot chocolate with a spoon. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Most important things are." Sophia studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine how much truth he could handle. "My father is Edmund Blackwell." Tommy's eyes widened. Even at 12, he knew that name carried weight in their city. "The real estate guy?" Tommy asked. "He owns like half the buildings downtown." "More than half," Sophia said with bitter accuracy. "Edmund Blackwell doesn't just own buildings, Tommy. He owns people. Politicians, judges, police commissioners. Anyone who might stand in the way of what he wants." Daniel felt pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. "And what does he want from you?" "Control." Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain still drumming against the windows. "He wants me to marry Richard Morse, his business partner. It would merge two of the most powerful real estate empires in the state." "But you don't want to marry him," Daniel observed. Sophia's laugh was hollow and sharp. "Richard Morse is a monster. He thinks women are possessions to be collected and displayed. Tonight, when I told him I would never marry him," she touched the bandage on her temple unconsciously. Rage burned hot and clean in Daniel's chest. "He hit you." "It wasn't the first time. But it was the first time he did it in front of Lily." Sophia's voice hardened with maternal fury. "I told him if he ever touched me again, I would destroy him. That's when he laughed and said my father had already made the choice for me." "Mama," Lily said suddenly, looking up from her hot chocolate with troubled eyes, "are the bad men going to find us here?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Daniel saw Sophia's carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She was trying to be strong for her daughter, but the weight of fear and exhaustion was becoming too much to bear alone. "Hey, Lily," Tommy said suddenly, his voice bright with forced cheer. "Want to see my room? I have a really cool dinosaur collection." Bless that boy, Daniel thought as Tommy expertly distracted Lily, leading her away from the heavy conversation that needed to happen between the adults. Within minutes, the sound of children's laughter drifted down from upstairs, a reminder that innocence could still exist, even in the midst of darkness. Alone in the kitchen, Sophia finally allowed her mask to slip. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she wrapped her arms around herself, and Daniel had to resist the urge to pull her into his embrace. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have involved you in this. But I didn't know where else to go. All of my father's friends, all the people I thought I could trust, they're all part of his world. And my mother." Her voice broke. "What about your mother?" "She died when I was Lily's age. Car accident. At least that's what my father told everyone." Sophia's eyes met his, and Daniel saw suspicion and old pain swirling in their depths. She had been threatening to leave him to take me away from his world of corruption and violence. 3 days later, her brakes failed on a mountain road. The implication hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You think he killed her?" "I think Edmund Blackwell removes obstacles, and my mother had become an obstacle." Sophia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I swore I would never let him control my life the way he controlled hers. But then Lily came along, and suddenly I had someone else to protect." Lily's father. Sophia's smile was bitter and self-deprecating. "A mistake in college. He was married, though he forgot to mention that until after I was pregnant. When my father found out, he made the problem disappear. I never saw him again." Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, feeling the tremor in her fingers. "You're not alone anymore, Sophia. Not tonight." "You don't understand," she said urgently. "My father doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. By helping me, you've made yourself a target. He'll come after you after Tommy. I won't be responsible for—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was firm but gentle. "I'm a grown man, Sophia. I make my own choices, and I choose to help you, both of you." "But why?" The question was barely a whisper. "You don't even know me. We're strangers." Daniel considered his answer carefully, aware that whatever he said next would shape everything that followed. 3 years ago, I watched my wife die in a hospital bed. Watched cancer eat away at the most beautiful, kind person I'd ever known. And I kept asking myself why. Why her? Why do good people suffer while cruel people prosper? Sophia listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. "I never found an answer to that question," Daniel continued. "But tonight, watching those men threaten you and your daughter, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. The question isn't why bad things happen to good people. The question is, what do we do about it when we have the chance to make a difference? And your answer? We fight. Not because we're guaranteed to win, but because it's right." Sophia stared at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. Hope, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who understood that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I haven't told you. About why my father is so desperate to control me." Daniel waited, giving her space to find her words. "When I turned 25, I inherited a trust fund from my grandmother. Not just money, but documents. Evidence of every dirty deal my father has made over the past 20 years. Bribes, intimidation, suspicious accidents, it's all there." The kitchen seemed to grow colder as the implications sank in. "You have evidence that could destroy him." "Evidence that could destroy half the city's power structure," Sophia corrected. "Judges, politicians, police officials. They're all in my father's pocket. My grandmother knew what kind of man he was, and she wanted me to have the power to stop him if I chose to. And Richard Morse is just as dirty as my father. Their marriage proposal isn't about love or even business. It's about making sure I never use that evidence. As Richard's wife, I would be under his control, and he would make sure the documents disappear forever." Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of what Sophia had just revealed. She wasn't just running from an abusive relationship or a controlling father. She was carrying the power to topple an empire of corruption, and that made her incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. "Where are the documents now?" "Safe deposit box downtown. And before you ask, I'm the only one who can access it. My grandmother made sure of that." The sound of children's laughter drifted down from upstairs, a stark contrast to the dark revelations unfolding in the kitchen. Daniel thought about Tommy, about the life they'd built together, from the ashes of loss, about the scholarship that would give his son opportunities Daniel had never dreamed of. By any rational measure, he should ask Sophia to leave, should protect his son from the storm that would inevitably follow. But as he looked at this brave, broken woman who was fighting to protect her daughter and potentially save countless others from her father's corruption, Daniel knew he couldn't turn away. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. "I don't know, hours, maybe days. My father has resources everywhere, and now that I've involved you," she trailed off, her face pale with worry. Daniel's phone buzzed again, and both of them tensed. Another unknown number, another message that made his blood run cold. The children are so innocent, aren't they? It would be a shame if something happened to disrupt their peaceful evening. Sophia read the message over his shoulder and went white as snow. "Oh God, they're watching us." Daniel moved to the window and carefully peered through the blinds. Across the street, a black sedan sat in the shadows, between streetlights, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. How long had it been there? How much had they seen? "Pack light," Daniel said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We're leaving." "Where can we go? My father owns half the hotels in the city, and his reach extends far beyond that." Daniel was already moving, his mind racing through possibilities. "My brother-in-law has a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours north, completely off the grid. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." "Daniel, you can't. Your life, Tommy's future, will mean nothing if we don't survive the night," Daniel interrupted. "Sophia, these people aren't going to stop, and I won't let them hurt you or Lily, or Tommy." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway with Lily close behind. Both children sensed the tension immediately, their earlier joy replaced by worry. "Dad, what's wrong?" Daniel knelt down to Tommy's level, choosing his words carefully. "We're going to take a little trip, buddy. Remember Uncle Mike's cabin? We're going to visit there tonight." Tommy's eyes were serious beyond his years. "Are we in danger?" "We're being careful," Daniel replied, which wasn't quite a lie. "Can you pack a bag quickly?" "Just essentials." As the children hurried upstairs, Sophia grabbed Daniel's arm. "I should go alone. Take Lily and disappear. You and Tommy can stay here, go back to your normal lives." "There is no normal life anymore," Daniel said firmly. "The moment I helped you tonight, I chose a side. And I don't abandon people I care about." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to explore. But as Sophia's eyes searched his face, Daniel saw the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Daniel replied. "I know you're brave enough to stand up to monsters. I know you love your daughter more than your own safety. I know you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. That's enough for me." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but the black sedan remained motionless in the shadows, waiting, watching, planning. Daniel grabbed his emergency cash from the kitchen drawer, money he'd been saving for Tommy's school clothes, now repurposed for survival. His service weapon from his brief stint in the military was locked in the bedroom safe upstairs. Whatever was coming, they would need to be prepared for anything. 15 minutes, he told Sophia. "Pack only what you can't live without." As they prepared to flee into the night, Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, his foreman at the construction site. "Daniel Jesus, man, what the hell is going on? 2 guys in suits just left here asking questions about you. Wanted to know your schedule, your addresses, everything." Daniel's blood turned to ice. What did you tell them? Nothing, of course. But Daniel, these weren't cops. They had this look about them, like they were used to getting answers whether people wanted to give them or not. Thanks for the heads up, Joe. If anyone else comes asking, you don't know anything about anything. Daniel, whatever you're mixed up in, I know. I'll be careful. As he hung up, Daniel realized that Blackwell's reach was even more extensive than he'd imagined. The man could mobilize resources across the city within hours, turning every corner into a potential trap. They've been to my work, he told Sophia quietly. We need to go now. The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled panic. Tommy packed with the efficiency of someone who'd learned early that life could change without warning. Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit and stayed close to her mother, her young face solemn with the understanding that they were running from something dangerous. Daniel grabbed his emergency kit from the garage. First aid supplies, flashlights, extra clothes. Sophia emerged from the bathroom with a small duffel bag and something clutched in her hand that she quickly tucked into her jacket pocket. What was that? Daniel asked. Insurance, Sophia replied cryptically. Something to keep us alive long enough to figure out how to fight back. As they prepared to leave through the back door, Daniel took one last look around the home he'd shared with Sarah and Tommy. Photos of happier times smiled down from the walls, memories of a life that was about to be left behind, possibly forever. I'm sorry, Sophia whispered, seeing the pain in his eyes. Don't be, Daniel replied, surprising himself with the truth in his words. This house has been a museum for 3 years. Maybe it's time we started living again, instead of just existing. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle as they slipped out the back door and made their way to Daniel's truck, parked in the alley behind his house. The black sedan hadn't moved, which meant they either hadn't seen the escape route or were confident enough in their surveillance that they weren't worried about their targets fleeing. Daniel hoped it was the former. As they drove through the dark streets of the city, Tommy and Lily whispered quietly in the back seat, sharing the tentative friendship that children form in times of crisis. In the passenger seat, Sophia stared out at the lights of the city she was leaving behind, perhaps forever. What happens now? She asked quietly. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the storm-dark streets. Now we disappear long enough to figure out how to fight back. Your father may have resources, but he's not omnipotent. Every empire has weaknesses. And if we can't find them? Daniel glanced at her profile in the dashboard light, seeing strength and determination beneath the exhaustion. Then we make our own. Behind them, unnoticed in the shadows, a pair of headlights began to follow at a careful distance. The hunt had begun, and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. In a world where power corrupted absolutely 4 unlikely allies were about to discover just how far they were willing to go to protect the people they loved. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and with it an uncertain future that would test everything they believed about justice, family, and the price of doing what's right. The headlights in Daniel's rearview mirror had maintained the same distance for 20 miles, appearing and disappearing around curves, but never getting closer, never falling behind. Professional surveillance, the kind that spoke of resources and training that went far beyond typical private security. Daniel's military instincts dormant for years, but never truly gone sharpened with each passing mile. We're being followed, he said quietly, not wanting to alarm the children, but needing Sophia to understand their situation. Sophia twisted in her seat to look back at her face pale in the dashboard light. How long since we left the house? Maybe before. Daniel's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. They wanted us to run. This is exactly what they planned. A trap. Or they're hurting us somewhere specific. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Sophia, I need you to tell me everything about your father's operation. How does he move people? How does he control territory outside the city? Sophia closed her eyes, accessing memories she'd tried to bury. He has connections everywhere. State police, federal agents, even some military contractors from his days in government work. And the mountain highways. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. There have been accidents over the years. Cars that went off mountain roads during storms. People who crossed him and then had unfortunate mishaps in isolated areas. The implication hung between them like a death sentence. Daniel glanced at the speedometer, calculating distances and options. They were committed to the mountain highway now, with miles of winding road ahead and limited places to turn around. If Blackwell's people had planned this route, they would have anticipated every possible escape. Dad! Tommy's voice came from the back seat, tight with worry. Why are we going so slow? Daniel realized he'd been unconsciously reducing speed as his mind worked through their predicament. The following car had matched his pace, exactly confirming his worst fears about professional surveillance. Just being careful in the rain, buddy, Daniel replied, forcing calm into his voice while his pulse hammered against his throat. In the back seat, Lily had fallen asleep against Tommy's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her, despite the tension filling the truck. Her stuffed rabbit was clutched protectively against her chest, and Tommy had carefully positioned his jacket over her small form to keep her warm. The sight of his son's natural protectiveness toward the little girl made Daniel's chest tighten with pride and terror in equal measure. There's something else, Sophia said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the engine and rain. About the evidence I have against my father. It's not just business corruption. Daniel waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. There are photographs, documents, proof of what really happened to my mother. Sophia's hands trembled as she spoke. My grandmother didn't just leave me financial inheritance. She left me justice. The weight of that revelation settled over Daniel like a physical force. Sophia wasn't just carrying evidence of business crimes. She was carrying proof of murder, possibly multiple murders. The stakes weren't just about corruption anymore. They were about bringing down a killer who had operated with impunity for decades. Does your father know you have them? He suspects. My grandmother was careful, but she couldn't hide everything. When I turned 25 and gained access to the trust, he started pushing the marriage to Richard more aggressively. I think he knows time is running out. Daniel's phone buzzed with another text, and this time he handed it to Sophia to read while he kept his eyes on the treacherous mountain road. Her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. What does it say? Turn around now or the children die first. Sophia's voice was hollow with terror. Daniel, we have to go back. I won't let them hurt Tommy because of me. We're not going back, Daniel said firmly, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. That's exactly what they want. The moment we turn around, we're dead. All of us. But Tommy, we'll be safer if we keep moving forward. Daniel's military training kicked in fully now, analyzing terrain and tactics with the clarity that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. They want us scared and running blind. But every threat they make is also information. They're not planning to kill us on this road, Sophia. They want us alive. How can you be sure? Because if they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. That car has been following us for 20 miles. One phone call could bring state police, federal agents, even military contractors like you mentioned. But instead, they're playing psychological warfare. That means they need something from us. Sophia considered this, her analytical mind cutting through fear to examine the logic. The evidence. They need to know where it is before they can eliminate me. Exactly. And as long as you're the only one who can access it, you have leverage. The road ahead curved sharply around a mountain face, and Daniel had to slow further as visibility dropped to mere yards in the heavy rain and fog. The following car's headlights disappeared behind the curve, giving them a momentary reprieve from the constant reminder of pursuit. There, Sophia pointed to a barely visible sign ahead. Overlook access road. If we can get off the main highway. Too obvious, Daniel interrupted. They'll expect us to try something like that. We need to think differently. As they rounded another curve, the lights of a small mountain town appeared below them, scattered like fallen stars in the valley. Daniel recognized the place from trips to his brother-in-law's cabin. Millbrook population, maybe 300, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. There, Daniel said, formulating a plan as they approached the town exit. We're going to do something they won't expect. What? We're going to hide in plain sight. Daniel took the Millbrook exit without signaling cutting off at the last possible moment. In his rearview mirror, he saw the following car continue straight on the highway, either caught off guard by the sudden maneuver or unwilling to reveal themselves by making an obvious pursuit move. Brilliant, Sophia breathed, and Daniel felt a spark of pride at her approval. The town of Millbrook clung to the mountainside like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, all white church steeples and warm yellow lights glowing through windows. Main Street was deserted at this hour, except for a lone police cruiser parked outside Mel's Diner, where the neon "Open 24 Hours" sign cast red and blue shadows on the wet pavement. Daniel pulled into the diner's parking lot and cut the engine, his mind working through their next moves. They'll figure out we took the exit eventually, but it'll buy us time. And right now, the safest place we can be is somewhere public with witnesses. Tommy stirred in the back seat as the engine noise stopped, his protective arm still around the sleeping Lily. Are we at Uncle Mike's cabin? Not yet, buddy. We're making a pit stop first. Daniel turned to face his son, seeing worry and trust warring in the boy's eyes. I need you to be brave for a little while longer, okay? Tommy nodded solemnly, and Daniel marveled again at his son's resilience. 3 years of dealing with his mother's death and his father's grief had forged steel in the boy's spine. What's the plan? Sophia asked quietly. Information first. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make our next move. Daniel nodded toward the diner. Local police means local connections. In a town this size, the sheriff probably knows everyone within 50 miles. If Blackwell has people operating in this area, they'll know about it. And if the sheriff is one of Blackwell's people, then we'll know that too. Daniel's smile was grim but determined. Sometimes the best defense is forcing your enemy to show their hand. They gathered their minimal belongings and made their way through the rain to the diner's entrance. The warm air that greeted them carried the smell of coffee and bacon normalcy, so complete it felt surreal after the tension of the drive. A handful of late-night customers occupied booths along the windows, mostly truckers and night shift workers seeking refuge from the storm. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from the coffee pot she was cleaning. Her name tag read Dolores, and she had the weathered look of someone who had seen everything life could throw at a small mountain town. Well now, she said with genuine warmth, you folks look like you've been through it tonight. Come on in out of that rain. Daniel chose a booth near the back that offered clear views of both the front entrance and the kitchen exit, old habits dying hard. As they settled in, Lily finally woke up, blinking owlishly at the unfamiliar surroundings. Where are we, Mama? Somewhere safe, baby. Sophia murmured, smoothing her daughter's hair with tender fingers. Just for a little while. Dolores approached with coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for the children, her maternal instincts clearly activated by the sight of a tired family seeking shelter from the storm. "You folks traveling far tonight?" "Visiting family up north," Daniel replied easily. "Had to make an unexpected trip." Dolores nodded sympathetically. "This weather's got everyone's plans turned upside down. Sheriff Morrison was just in here saying they've had to close Route 15 north of here due to flooding. Might want to call ahead before you continue on." Daniel filed that information away while maintaining his casual demeanor. "Sheriff Morrison, you said he available tonight if we need to check on road conditions. Should be making his rounds about now. Usually stops back here around midnight for coffee." Dolores glanced at the clock behind the counter. "That'd be in about 20 minutes. Perfect, Daniel thought. Either Morrison was clean and could provide valuable local intelligence, or he was compromised and would reveal Blackwell's reach into the area. Either way, they'd know what they were dealing with. As Dolores bustled away to tend to other customers, Sophia leaned across the table, her voice barely a whisper. "What if he's one of them?" "Then we adapt," Daniel replied calmly. "But look around, Sophia. Look at this place." She followed his gaze, taking in the worn vinyl booths, the faded photographs of local high school football teams, the handwritten specials board that hadn't been updated in months. Everything about Mel's Diner spoke of authentic small-town life, the kind of community that still believed in helping neighbors and treating strangers with kindness. "This isn't the kind of place that breeds corruption," Daniel continued. "Your father's power comes from cities from complex systems where money can buy influence. Out here, reputation and relationships matter more than cash." As if to prove his point, one of the truckers at the counter turned toward their booth. "You folks okay? Saw you pull in looking pretty rattled." "Just tired," Daniel replied with a grateful smile. "Long drive and bad weather." "Tell me about it. Been fighting this storm all the way from Denver." The trucker gestured toward the windows where rain continued to streak the glass. "Name's Bill, by the way. You need anything, just holler. We look after each other out here." The simple offer of help from a stranger reinforced Daniel's assessment. This was a community where Blackwell's usual tactics of intimidation and corruption would stand out like blood on snow. "Thank you," Sophia said softly, and Daniel saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. After years of living in a world where every kindness came with strings attached, she was overwhelmed by genuine human decency. Tommy had struck up a quiet conversation with Lily, sharing his hot chocolate and drawing pictures on napkins to keep her entertained. Watching them, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about protecting refugees anymore. These people were becoming family, and family was worth any risk. The diner's bell chimed as the door opened, bringing with it a gust of rain-scented air and a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. Sheriff Morrison looked to be in his early 60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent serving a rural community. His eyes swept the diner with practiced efficiency before settling on their booth with mild curiosity. "Evening, Dolores," he called to the waitress. "The usual when you get a chance." "Coming right up, Sheriff," Dolores replied, already reaching for the coffee pot. Morrison made his way toward the counter, his path taking him past their booth. He nodded politely to Daniel, the kind of acknowledgement small-town law enforcement offered to unfamiliar faces. "Evening, folks. Everything all right tonight?" It was a casual question, but Daniel heard the lawman's instincts beneath it. Morrison had noticed them, cataloged them as strangers in his territory, and was making preliminary contact to assess any potential problems. "Evening, Sheriff," Daniel replied respectfully. "Just passing through, seeking shelter from this storm." Morrison's eyes took in the details with professional thoroughness. 4 people with minimal luggage looking tired and slightly on edge. The kind of scenario that could indicate anything from a family emergency to something more serious. Long drive ahead. We hope not too long, Daniel said carefully. Heard Route 15 north might be flooded. That's right. Won't be clear until morning at the earliest. Morrison's gaze sharpened slightly. You folks in some kind of hurry emergency situation? The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Daniel could sense Sophia tensing beside him, ready to run or fight if Morrison proved to be one of Blackwell's people. But his instincts told him the sheriff was exactly what he appeared to be, a dedicated public servant trying to help travelers in distress. Family emergency, Daniel said, sticking close to the truth. Trying to get these ladies somewhere safe for the night. Morrison's expression shifted to concern and understanding. Well, if you're looking for lodging, Martha's Inn up the street is clean and quiet. Martha's good people and she'll take care of you. We appreciate that, Sheriff. Mind if I ask you something? Shoot. Daniel chose his words carefully, fishing for information without revealing too much. We've had some trouble in the city. People following us, making threats. Any chance that kind of thing might follow us up here? Morrison's demeanor changed instantly, the casual small-town sheriff replaced by a serious law enforcement professional. What kind of threats? The kind that involve powerful people who don't like being told no, Daniel replied, meeting Morrison's eyes directly. The sheriff studied Daniel's face for a long moment, then glanced at Sophia and the children. Whatever he saw there convinced him this wasn't a casual complaint or paranoid delusion. You folks mind if I sit down for a minute? Daniel gestured to the empty side of the booth, and Morrison settled his considerable frame across from them. Up close, Daniel could see the intelligence in the man's eyes, the kind of sharp awareness that came from years of reading people and situations. Now then, Morrison said quietly, why don't you tell me what's really going on? Daniel looked at Sophia, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. They were committed now, trusting their lives to a stranger in a small mountain town. Edmund Blackwell, Daniel said simply, watching Morrison's reaction. The sheriff's expression didn't change, but Daniel caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hand moved unconsciously toward his service weapon. That's a name I know, Morrison said after a pause. And not in a good way. What's your connection to Blackwell? This is his daughter, Daniel replied, indicating Sophia. She's trying to protect her child from him and his associates. Morrison's gaze shifted to Sophia with new understanding and respect. Ma'am, if you're running from Edmund Blackwell, you're in more danger than you probably realize. That man has reach that extends far beyond the city limits. How far? Sophia asked quietly. State police, some federal agencies, military contractors. He's got people everywhere. Morrison's expression was grim. But not everywhere. And not here. And the simple statement carried weight of absolute conviction. Daniel felt some of the tension in his chest begin to ease. You're sure about that? Morrison's smile was sharp and humorless. Mr. Carter, I've been sheriff of this county for 15 years. I know every person, every family, every business relationship within 50 miles. If Blackwell had people operating in my territory, I'd know about it. How can you be certain? Because 3 years ago, one of his business associates tried to buy land up here for a development project. When the local landowners refused to sell, strange things started happening. Accidents, property damage, intimidation. Morrison's voice hardened. I made it very clear to Mr. Blackwell's people that their particular brand of business wasn't welcome in my county. And they backed off. After I arrested 2 of his men for assault and made sure the charges stuck, yes, Blackwell may have influence in the cities, but out here the law still means something. For the first time since fleeing their home, Daniel felt hope beginning to bloom in his chest. They had found sanctuary, at least temporarily, in the form of an honest lawman who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Sheriff," Sophia said quietly, "there's something you should know. About my father, and the reasons he's so desperate to control me." Morrison leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her words. "I have evidence. Documents, photographs, recordings, proof of corruption, bribery, and—" She paused, gathering courage. "Murder." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw the lawman's mind processing the implications. "Your mother—" Sophia's nod was barely perceptible. "Among others. My grandmother documented everything before she died. She wanted justice, but she was afraid to move against him while she was alive. So she left the evidence to me." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup as he considered what he'd just heard. "Miss Blackwell," he said finally, "you're talking about bringing down one of the most powerful men in the state. You understand what that means. It means my daughter might grow up in a world where monsters can't buy their way out of justice," Sophia replied with quiet determination. Morrison studied her face, seeing the same strength and resolve that had caught Daniel's attention. "And you, Mr. Carter? You understand what you've gotten yourself into?" Daniel thought about the quiet life he'd built with Tommy, the careful routine of work and school and healing from loss. Then he looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully, against her mother's shoulder, and at Tommy, who had accepted these strangers into his world with the same generous heart his mother had possessed. "I understand that some things are worth fighting for, Sheriff. And I understand that good people shouldn't have to face monsters alone." Morrison nodded slowly, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "All right then. Here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour in the warm sanctuary of Mel's Diner, while rain continued to wash the mountains clean, Sheriff Morrison laid out a plan that would either save their lives or get them all killed. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel felt like they weren't facing an impossible enemy alone. The storm outside was beginning to ease, but the real battle was just beginning. And in a small mountain town where justice still mattered, and good people still stood up to evil for unlikely allies, we're about to discover just how far they were willing to go to protect the innocent and bring truth to light. Sheriff Morrison's plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. As he outlined the strategy in hushed tones across the diner table, Daniel felt the weight of everything they were about to attempt settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. They weren't just running anymore. They were going to war. The key is forcing Blackwell to make the first move in a controlled environment. Morrison explained, his weathered fingers tracing patterns on the table as he spoke. Right now, he's operating from a position of strength because he controls the battlefield. We need to change that dynamic. "How?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she unconsciously held Lily closer. "By giving him exactly what he wants, but on our terms." Morrison's eyes met hers with steady conviction. "You're going to call your father Miss Blackwell, and you're going to tell him you're ready to make a deal." The color drained from Sophia's face. "You want me to surrender?" "I want you to bait a trap," Morrison corrected gently. "Blackwell's weakness is his arrogance. He believes his money and power make him untouchable. We're going to use that against him." Daniel leaned forward, his military instincts analyzing the tactical situation. "What kind of trap?" Morrison glanced around the nearly empty diner, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "There's an old mining facility about 10 miles north of here. Been abandoned for 15 years, but the access roads are still good. Remote enough that Blackwell can bring his people without witnesses, but the terrain gives us advantages he won't expect. Advantages. I know every inch of those mountains, Mr. Carter. Every trail, every cave, every escape route. More importantly, I have friends up there. Hunters, hikers, people who live off the grid by choice. Good people who don't much like outsiders threatening their neighbors. Sophia shook her head desperately. You don't understand. My father doesn't just bring bodyguards. He brings soldiers, military contractors with advanced weapons and training. We'd be walking into a massacre. Not if we're smart about it, Morrison replied calmly. And not if we have something he needs more than your death. Daniel saw the direction Morrison was heading and felt his stomach clench with understanding. The evidence. You want to use it as leverage. Exactly. But not the real evidence. A convincing fake that we can use to draw him out while keeping the genuine articles safe. That's incredibly dangerous, Sophia protested. If he discovers it's fake before we can what? Morrison interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Miss Blackwell, with respect, what's your alternative? Keep running until his people finally corner you, hide for the rest of your lives, while he continues destroying others. Or maybe hope he'll just give up and leave you alone. The brutal honesty of the questions hit home. Sophia's shoulders sagged as she confronted the reality they all knew, but hadn't wanted to voice. There was no escape from Edmund Blackwell. There was only victory or death. How long do we have to prepare? Daniel asked quietly. Dawn, Morrison replied. I'll need the rest of the night to get my people in position and set up the equipment we'll need. Can you create convincing fake documents by then? Sophia nodded slowly, reaching into her jacket to withdraw a small tablet she'd managed to save during their hasty escape. I have copies of some of the real evidence on here. I can alter dates and details enough to make convincing fakes while keeping the originals safe. Where are the originals? Safe deposit box downtown like I told Daniel. But there's something else. Sophia's fingers worked across the tablet screen as she spoke. My grandmother wasn't just documenting my father's crimes for future use. She was building a dead man's switch. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Meaning, if anything happens to me, if I don't check in with a specific secure server every 72 hours, everything gets released automatically. Bank records, photographs, audio recordings, witness testimonies. All of it goes to every major news outlet, federal agency, and law enforcement department simultaneously. Daniel stared at her in amazement. You've been carrying a nuclear weapon this whole time. More like a suicide vest, Sophia replied grimly. My grandmother knew that threatening to expose him wouldn't be enough. She had to make my survival essential to his continued existence. Does your father know about the dead man's switch? I told him 3 months ago when he first started pressuring me about the marriage to Richard. That's when the threats escalated, but also when he became more careful about how he approached me. He can't just have me killed anymore. Morrison absorbed this information with the steady calm of a man who had dealt with complex criminal cases before. That changes things. It means he'll be even more desperate to control the situation personally. He'll want to be there when you're taken to ensure you disable the switch before anything permanent happens. Which makes him vulnerable, Daniel added, understanding dawning in his voice. Exactly. Arrogant men make mistakes when they think they're close to victory. Morrison's expression was grim but determined. Now here's what we're going to do. Over the next hour, as the storm outside gradually subsided and the diner's other customers drifted away into the night, Morrison outlined a plan that was audacious, dangerous, and just crazy enough to work. Every detail was crucial, every timing element critical. There would be no second chances if things went wrong. The most important thing, Morrison emphasized as they prepared to leave, is that everyone understands their role and sticks to it. No heroics, no improvisation. We follow the plan exactly, or people die. Daniel looked at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in the booth beside Lily, children exhausted by the emotional trauma of the evening. His son's peaceful face was a stark reminder of what they were fighting for and what they stood to lose. "Tommy stays out of this," Daniel said firmly. "Whatever happens, my son doesn't get anywhere near that mining facility." "Agreed," Morrison nodded. "Martha's Inn has a basement that used to be a bomb shelter during the Cold War. The children will be safe there with Martha watching over them." Sophia's hand found Daniel's across the table, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that spoke of shared fear and mutual support. "Are we really going to do this?" Daniel looked into her eyes, seeing strength and vulnerability in equal measure. 3 days ago, he had been a single father, struggling to build a future for his son. Now he was preparing to wage war against one of the most powerful men in the state. The transformation should have terrified him, but instead, he felt more alive than he had since Sarah's death. "We're going to end this," he said quietly. "One way or another." The walk to Martha's Inn through the rain-washed streets of Millbrook felt like a march toward destiny. The town slept peacefully around them, unaware that its quiet streets were about to become the staging ground for a battle that could reshape the balance of power across the entire state. Martha Caldwell was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at their bedraggled group and immediately ushered them inside without questions, her maternal instincts activated by the sight of exhausted children and desperate adults. "The basement room is ready," she told Morrison, with the efficiency of someone who had clearly dealt with unusual situations before. "Stocked with food and water for several days if needed." "Thank you, Martha," Morrison replied with genuine gratitude. "You know the risks." "I know Edmund Blackwell's reputation," Martha replied grimly. "And I know what happens to communities when men like him are allowed to operate without consequences. You do what you need to do, Sheriff. These babies will be safe here." As they settled Tommy and Lily in the inn's secure basement, Daniel felt his heart breaking at the necessity of leaving his son behind. Tommy was trying to be brave, but fear showed clearly in his young eyes. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" Daniel knelt beside the small bed where Tommy lay, choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we're all safe, buddy. But I need you to be strong and take care of Lily while we're gone. Like Mom would have done." The simple question hit Daniel like a physical blow. Sarah had always been the one who comforted others, who saw the best in people, who believed that love could overcome any obstacle. Now her son was trying to follow her example in the face of unimaginable danger. "Exactly like Mom would have done," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have protected someone who needed help, no matter what it cost her." Tommy nodded solemnly, then surprised Daniel by throwing his arms around his father's neck in a fierce hug. "I love you, Dad. Come back to me." "I love you too, Tommy, more than anything in this world." As Daniel rose to leave, he felt Sophia's hand on his arm. She was looking down at Lily, who had already fallen asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "She's never known safety like this," Sophia whispered. "A place where people help each other just because it's right. Where children can sleep without fear." "She will again," Daniel promised. "After tomorrow, she'll never have to be afraid of your father again." "What if we don't survive?" Daniel turned to face her fully, seeing the woman who had emerged from the storm into his life and changed everything. Beautiful, brave, broken, and healing. The mother who would sacrifice anything for her child. The daughter seeking justice for crimes that had haunted her family for decades. Then we'll have died fighting for something that mattered, he said simply. And our children will grow up knowing that good people stood up to evil when it counted. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded with determination that matched his own. Whatever happened in the morning, they would face it together. Sheriff Morrison was waiting for them outside the inn, his patrol car loaded with equipment that spoke of serious preparation. Radio gear, tactical vests, weapons, and surveillance equipment that looked far more sophisticated than what Daniel would have expected a small-town sheriff to possess. Military surplus, Morrison explained, seeing Daniel's curious look. Amazing what gets declared obsolete and sold cheap to rural law enforcement. Sometimes it pays to have friends in the right places. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the abandoned mining facility, Morrison outlined the final details of their plan. Every contingency had been considered, every possible escape route mapped. But as any military veteran knew, no plan survived first contact with the enemy. The key is controlling the narrative, Morrison explained as they wound through increasingly remote mountain roads. Blackwell thinks he's coming to collect his wayward daughter and eliminate a threat. Instead, he's walking into a situation where every word will be recorded, every action documented, and every crime he commits will be broadcast live to law enforcement agencies across the state. Daniel checked his weapon again, muscle memory from his military service taking over. What about his military contractors? They'll sweep for surveillance equipment as soon as they arrive. Let them find some, Morrison replied with a grim smile. The obvious cameras and microphones they discover will give them false confidence, while the real surveillance stays hidden. The abandoned mining facility emerged from the morning mist like something from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. Rust-stained buildings clustered around the skeletal remains of processing equipment, all of it slowly being reclaimed by the mountain wilderness. It was perfect for their purposes, isolated enough for Blackwell to feel secure, but with enough structures and terrain features to provide tactical advantages for the defenders. Position here. Morrison indicated a spot behind the main processing building that offered clear sight lines to the access road, while remaining concealed from approaching vehicles. Whatever happens, you stay in position until I give the signal. And if something goes wrong, Morrison's expression was steady and calm. Then you do whatever it takes to keep Miss Blackwell alive long enough for the evidence to matter. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sophia made the call that would determine all their fates. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed her father's number, but her voice was steady when he answered. "Hello, Daddy?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats before Edmund Blackwell's cultured voice responded. Even through the phone's speaker, Daniel could hear the mixture of relief and rage in the man's tone. "Sophia, do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" "I know exactly how much trouble I've caused," Sophia replied, steel entering her voice. "The question is whether you're ready to discuss terms." "Terms?" Blackwell's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, my dear. You're a fugitive with a child hiding in the mountains with some misguided Good Samaritan who has no idea what he's gotten himself into. Actually, Daddy, I think I'm in exactly the position to negotiate. Unless you've forgotten about Grandmother's insurance policy." Another silence, longer this time. When Blackwell spoke again, his voice carried the careful control of a man who was used to having absolute power, but had just been reminded of his limitations. "What do you want?" "I want to make a deal. The evidence in exchange for my freedom and my daughter's safety." "And the young man who's been helping you, Mr. Carter, isn't it?" The casual mention of Daniel's name sent chills down his spine. Blackwell's reach truly was extraordinary if he could identify and research a random stranger within hours of first contact. "He gets left alone," Sophia said firmly. "Completely alone. Him and his son." "That depends on how cooperative he's willing to be going forward," Blackwell replied with silky menace. "Some secrets require ongoing discretion." "No ongoing anything," Sophia shot back. "Clean slate for everyone, or the dead man's switch stays active." Daniel could hear the wheels turning in Blackwell's mind as the man calculated odds and options. The master manipulator was being forced to negotiate from a position of weakness, and he clearly didn't like it. "Where?" Blackwell asked finally. Sophia gave him the coordinates of the mining facility, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was setting in motion. "1 hour. You come alone or the deal is off." "My dear girl, surely you don't expect me to venture into the wilderness without adequate protection." "Bring whoever you want," Sophia replied. "But remember that I'll have protection too, and mine includes people who can't be bought." After she hung up, the three of them stood in the growing daylight, each lost in their own thoughts about what the next hour would bring. Daniel found himself thinking about Sarah, about the promises he'd made to her as she lay dying. Protect Tommy. Give him opportunities. Be the kind of man who stood up for what was right. "Second thoughts?" Morrison asked quietly. Daniel looked at Sophia, seeing determination and fear warring in her expression. Thought about Lily and Tommy sleeping safely in Martha's basement. Considered the easy life he could have chosen, the path of looking the other way and pretending that other people's problems weren't his concern. "No second thoughts," he said firmly. "Let's finish this." The sound of vehicles approaching echoed off the mountain walls long before the convoy came into view. Black SUVs moving in formation, too many and too coordinated to be anything other than a military-style operation. Daniel counted at least 6 vehicles, which meant Blackwell had brought an army. "Remember," Morrison said into his radio, "nobody moves until I give the word. Let them get positioned and comfortable before we spring the trap." The vehicles arranged themselves in a precise perimeter around the main building, and Daniel watched through binoculars as armed men in tactical gear deployed with professional efficiency. These weren't typical corporate security guards. They moved with the discipline and coordination of special forces operators. "Military contractors," Sophia confirmed grimly. "My father doesn't take chances." From the center vehicle, 2 figures emerged that Daniel recognized from their confrontation outside Sophia's former home. The large man in the expensive suit who had thrown her belongings into the rain, and the younger man in the black coat, whose presence seemed to leach warmth from the air itself. But it was the third figure that commanded attention. Edmund Blackwell stepped from his vehicle like a king surveying his domain, perfectly dressed, despite the early hour and remote location. Even at a distance, Daniel could see the aura of power and menace that surrounded the man like a dark cloud. "Showtime," Morrison said quietly. Sophia emerged from their concealed position, with her hands visible, walking slowly toward the center of the cleared area between the buildings. Every step was measured and deliberate, a woman walking toward either salvation or destruction with equal courage. "Hello, Daddy," she called out when she was within speaking distance. Blackwell's smile was cold and predatory as he approached his daughter. "Sophia, you look tired, my dear. This little adventure has been hard on you." "Not as hard as spending the rest of my life married to Richard Morse would have been." Blackwell's expression hardened at the defiance in her voice. "That arrangement would have been beneficial for everyone involved. Your grandmother filled your head with romantic nonsense about love and independence, but the real world requires practical choices. The real world requires justice, Sophia shot back. Something you've been avoiding for 20 years. Justice, Blackwell laughed harshly. My dear girl, I am justice in this part of the world. I decide what's right and wrong, what's permitted and what's punished. That's what power means. Not anymore, Sophia replied, and Daniel heard steel in her voice that matched her father's arrogance. Not when the whole world can see what kind of monster you really are. It was then that Blackwell noticed the small camera clipped to Sophia's jacket, the nearly invisible microphone at her collar. His face went white with rage as he realized that their entire conversation was being broadcast live. You clever little bitch! He snarled, all pretense of paternal affection vanishing. You think your parlor tricks will save you? I think the truth will save me, Sophia replied calmly. Every word you've spoken, every threat you've made, it's all being recorded and transmitted to law enforcement agencies across the state. Blackwell's hand moved toward his jacket, but froze as Morrison's voice echoed across the facility through a hidden speaker system. Edmund Blackwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and accessory to murder. You have the right to remain silent. The clearing erupted into chaos as Blackwell's mercenaries realized they had walked into a trap. But their training and discipline showed as they immediately moved to defensive positions, turning a simple arrest into a potential siege. Take her! Blackwell screamed at his men. Whatever the cost, take her alive. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Morrison's hidden allies revealed themselves. The peaceful mountain morning shattered by the sound of automatic weapons and shouted orders. Daniel broke cover and sprinted toward Sophia, his only thought to reach her before Blackwell's men could carry out their orders. A bullet whined past his ear as he dove behind an overturned mining cart, dragging Sophia down with him as chaos raged around them. Through the smoke and noise, he could see Blackwell being hustled toward his vehicle by bodyguards. The powerful man's face twisted with rage at seeing his carefully constructed empire crumbling in real time. The switch! Sophia shouted over the gunfire. I have to disable the dead man's switch or everything gets released anyway. Daniel realized the terrible irony of their situation. They had successfully trapped Blackwell and were broadcasting his crimes to the world, but Sophia's own insurance policy was about to doom them all unless she could prove she was still alive and in control. How long do we have? 20 minutes until the next check-in. 20 minutes to end a war that had been decades in the making. 20 minutes to bring justice to a man who had thought himself above the law. 20 minutes to save not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone Blackwell would destroy if he escaped this trap. As bullets flew and sirens wailed in the distance, Daniel pulled Sophia closer and prepared for the fight of their lives. Everything they had worked for, everything they loved, hung in the balance of the next few minutes. The mountain dawn had become a battlefield, and only one side would walk away alive. The mining cart provided precious little cover, as bullets sparked off its rusted metal surface, but it was all that stood between Daniel and Sophia and certain death. Around them, the abandoned facility had become a war zone with Morrison's hidden allies engaging Blackwell's mercenaries in a deadly game of cat and mouse among the industrial ruins. 18 minutes! Sophia shouted over the gunfire, her fingers flying over her tablet screen as she tried to access the dead man's switch while bullets whined overhead. I can't get a signal through all this interference. Daniel risked a glance around the cart and immediately ducked back as a sniper's bullet chipped concrete inches from his head. Blackwell's men had taken professional positions throughout the facility, turning their trap into a potential massacre. But through the chaos, he could see Morrison's plan working. Each engagement, each shouted order, each gunshot was being captured by hidden cameras and broadcast live to law enforcement agencies across the state. There, Sophia pointed toward the main processing building where a cell tower repeater was mounted on the roof. If I can get close enough to that tower, I can get a clean signal to disable the switch. Daniel assessed the distance, 50 yards of open ground under fire from at least 3 different positions. In his military days, he might have called for air support or artillery to clear the path. Here, they had nothing but courage and desperate necessity. "Sheriff," Daniel called into his radio. "We need covering fire to reach the main building." Morrison's voice crackled back through the static. "Negative on that, Carter. Too many hostiles between your position and the tower. Find another way." Another way. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities while precious seconds ticked away. Then he saw it, the old conveyor system that had once carried ore from the processing building to the loading dock. The elevated track ran directly over their position, providing a concealed route if they could reach it. "Can you climb?" he asked Sophia urgently. She followed his gaze to the rusted metal framework 20 feet above their heads. "In a skirt and heels, you're insane." "Insane beats dead," Daniel replied grimly, "and we're almost out of time." The sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for them. Blackwell's men were advancing through the facility, methodically clearing each position. Within minutes, their hiding spot would be overrun. Daniel helped Sophia remove her impractical shoes, then boosted her up toward the lowest support beam of the conveyor system. Her business attire was completely unsuited for climbing, but desperation gave her strength and agility she didn't know she possessed. As they made their way along the elevated track, Daniel could see the battle unfolding below with terrifying clarity. Morrison's people were outnumbered and outgunned, but they knew the terrain and were using every advantage the abandoned facility provided. Still, it was only a matter of time before Blackwell's superior firepower overwhelmed their defensive positions. 15 minutes. Sophia gasped as they reached a platform halfway to the main building. Her tablet showed the countdown timer inexorably approaching 0 each passing second, bringing them closer to catastrophe. Below them, Edmund Blackwell himself had taken cover behind his armored SUV, his perfect composure finally cracking as he watched his carefully planned operation dissolve into chaos. Daniel could see him shouting orders at his men, demanding they capture Sophia alive at any cost. "He's desperate," Daniel observed. "Good. Desperate men make mistakes." As if to prove his point, Blackwell emerged from cover and began advancing toward the main building with a squad of his most experienced mercenaries. The billionaire was taking personal command of the operation, abandoning the safe distance he usually maintained from his crimes. "He's coming for you himself," Daniel warned Sophia. "Let him come," she replied with fierce determination. "I've been waiting 20 years for this confrontation." They reached the main building just as Blackwell's squad entered from the ground level. Daniel could hear boots on metal stairs as the mercenaries began their systematic search of the structure. Time was running out in every possible way. The cell tower repeater was mounted on a platform at the very top of the building, accessible only by a narrow maintenance ladder that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. As Sophia began the precarious climb, her tablet clutched against her chest. Daniel positioned himself to guard the only access route. 10 minutes! Sophia called down as she reached the platform and began frantically working to establish a signal connection. The first mercenary appeared on the stairs below his tactical gear, an assault rifle marking him as a professional soldier rather than a common criminal. Daniel had the advantage of higher ground, but he was outgunned and outnumbered. This would come down to tactics and determination rather than firepower. "Drop your weapon," the mercenary shouted. "We don't want to hurt you, but we will if necessary." Then you'd better bring more men, Daniel replied, his military training taking over completely. The firefight that followed was brief but intense. Daniel used every trick he'd learned in Afghanistan, turning the building's layout into a maze of blind corners and fatal funnels that negated the mercenaries' numerical advantage. But he couldn't hold them forever, and every second spent fighting was a second Sophia didn't have to complete her task. 6 minutes. Sophia's voice carried a note of panic as she struggled with the satellite connection. The interference is too strong, I can't get through. Below them, more mercenaries were entering the building. Daniel could hear Blackwell's voice among them, the powerful man finally taking direct control of the operation that would determine his fate. Find her, Blackwell screamed. I don't care what it takes. She dies here or we all die in prison. The admission was being broadcast live to law enforcement agencies across the state, another nail in the coffin of Blackwell's empire. But it would mean nothing if they didn't survive to see justice done. 4 minutes. Sophia's voice was tight with desperation. Daniel made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days ago. Abandoning his defensive position, he began climbing toward Sophia's platform while laying down suppressing fire to keep the mercenaries at bay. If she couldn't establish the connection from up there, they would have to find another way. What are you doing? Sophia demanded as he reached her position. Changing the plan, Daniel replied grimly. If you can't disable the switch from here, then we make sure the evidence gets released anyway. But that means your father goes down no matter what happens to us, Daniel interrupted. Sometimes that's the best victory we can achieve. Sophia stared at him for a moment, seeing the resignation and determination in his eyes. Then her expression hardened with resolve. No, I won't let him win by making us martyrs. There has to be another way. She was right, of course. Dying heroically might serve justice, but it would leave Tommy and Lily orphaned and traumatized. There had to be a solution that saved everyone except the guilty. The interference, Sophia said suddenly, her analytical mind cutting through panic to find clarity. It's not just random electronic noise. Someone is actively jamming our signal. Daniel understood immediately. Blackwell's people have jamming equipment. If we can take it out, I can get through, Sophia finished. But where is it? The answer came in the form of Edmund Blackwell himself, who appeared on the platform below them with a device that looked like a sophisticated radio transmitter. The billionaire's face was flushed with exertion and rage, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had built an empire on the destruction of others. 3 minutes, my dear daughter, Blackwell called up to them. 3 minutes until your grandmother's little insurance policy destroys everything we've built, everything your mother died to protect. My mother died because you killed her, Sophia screamed back, years of suppressed rage finally exploding into the open. Blackwell's smile was cold and reptilian. Your mother died because she forgot her place, just as you're about to forget yours. He raised a pistol toward their platform, and Daniel realized that Blackwell had abandoned any pretense of taking Sophia alive. The man was prepared to die rather than face justice, but he was determined to take his daughter with him. The shot echoed through the building like thunder, but it wasn't Blackwell who fired. Sheriff Morrison appeared behind the billionaire, his service weapon smoking, as Blackwell's jamming device sparked and died. The powerful man staggered, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the platform below. Signal's clear, Morrison shouted. Do it now. Sophia's fingers flew over her tablet as she established the connection that would save their lives. The dead man's switch responded immediately, accepting her security codes and resetting its countdown timer. They were safe, at least from that particular threat. But the battle was far from over. Blackwell's mercenaries continued their assault on the building, and their employer's injury had only made them more desperate and dangerous. Daniel could hear them advancing up the stairs, their tactical discipline holding, despite the chaos around them. "We need to get out of here," Daniel said urgently. "The zip line," Morrison called from below, pointing toward a cable that had once carried materials between buildings. "It's your only way out." The cable stretched from their platform to the loading dock on the far side of the facility, a distance of nearly 100 yards over a 40-foot drop. It was rusty, untested, and potentially deadly. It was also their only chance. Daniel tested the cable's mounting points, finding them corroded but still solid. "Can you handle this?" Sophia looked at the precarious escape route, then at the mercenaries flooding into the building below. "Do I have a choice?" "We go together," Daniel decided, wrapping his belt around the cable and positioning Sophia in front of him. "Hold on tight, and whatever you do, don't look down." The ride down the zip line was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They flew over the heads of Blackwell's mercenaries, who scrambled to bring their weapons to bear on the fast-moving targets. Bullets whined past them as they descended, but the speed and angle made accurate shooting nearly impossible. They hit the loading dock hard, rolling across the concrete platform in a tangle of limbs and torn clothing. Daniel's shoulder screamed in protest as old injuries from his military service reminded him that he wasn't 25 anymore. But they were alive, and they were together, and that was all that mattered. "The children," Sophia gasped as they untangled themselves. "We have to get back to Tommy and Lily." "Sheriff Morrison can handle the cleanup here," Daniel agreed, helping her to her feet. "This is over." But as they made their way toward the facility's exit, a figure emerged from the shadows that made Daniel's blood run cold. Richard Morse, the man Sophia had been forced to flee from in the first place, stood blocking their path with a gun in his hand and madness in his eyes. "Going somewhere, darling." Morse's voice was smooth and cultured, but underneath lay the venom of a man who had been denied what he considered his property. "I'm afraid our wedding has been postponed far too long." "Richard," Sophia said quietly, her voice steady despite the terror Daniel could see in her eyes. "It's over. My father's operation is finished. The authorities have everything they need." "Your father was always too concerned with subtlety," Morse replied with a cold smile. "I prefer more direct approaches to problem solving." He raised the gun toward Sophia, and Daniel saw murder in the man's eyes. This wasn't about business or arranged marriages anymore. This was about a sadistic predator who had been denied his prey for too long. Daniel moved without thinking, throwing himself between Sophia and the gun just as Morse pulled the trigger. The bullet hit him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the concrete with shocking force. Pain exploded through his body as he struggled to breathe, tasting blood and feeling warmth spreading across his shirt. "Daniel!" Sophia's scream seemed to come from very far away as she dropped beside him, her hands pressing against his wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. "How romantic," Morse observed with sick satisfaction. "The hero dies saving the damsel in distress. But don't worry, my dear Sophia. You'll be joining him soon enough." He raised the gun again, but this time the shot came from a different direction. Sheriff Morrison's rifle spoke with authority from across the facility, and Richard Morse crumpled to the ground with a bullet through his heart. The threat that had started this nightmare was finally, permanently eliminated. "Medic!" Morrison's voice boomed across the facility as he sprinted toward their position. "We need a medic here now." Daniel tried to speak to tell Sophia that he was all right, but blood filled his mouth and the world began to gray around the edges. He could feel his strength ebbing away with each heartbeat, and he realized with crystal clarity that he might not survive to see the end of this story. "Stay with me," Sophia pleaded, her tears falling on his face as she held him. "Please, Daniel, stay with me." He wanted to promise her that he wanted to tell her that they would raise their children together and build the life that had seemed impossible just days ago. But the darkness was closing in, and all he could do was squeeze her hand and hope that love would be enough to bridge whatever gap separated them. The sound of helicopters filled the air as federal agents and medical personnel descended on the facility. The cavalry had finally arrived, but Daniel wasn't sure if it was too late for him. He felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher, heard Sophia's voice promising to meet him at the hospital, saw the concerned faces of paramedics as they worked to save his life. Through it all, one thought kept him anchored to consciousness: Tommy and Lily were safe. Whatever happened to him, the children they both loved would grow up free from the shadows that had haunted their parents' lives. The helicopter ride to the trauma center passed in a blur of medical procedures and urgent radio calls. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of the paramedics working over Sarah and promises he had made to the dying. When he finally woke up 3 days later, the first thing he saw was Sophia's face. She was sitting beside his hospital bed, her hand holding his, her eyes red from crying, but filled with relief at seeing him awake. "Hey," he said weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "Hey yourself," she replied, and he could hear the tears in her voice. "You scared me." "Tommy, Lily, safe. They're both fine. Tommy hasn't left the hospital since they brought you in. Lily keeps asking when Uncle Daniel is going to wake up and take her for ice cream." Uncle Daniel. The title hit him with unexpected force, carrying implications of family and belonging that he hadn't dared to hope for. Through the fog of medication and exhaustion, he began to process what Sophia was telling him. "Your father, in federal custody along with what's left of his organization. The evidence from my grandmother, combined with the recordings from yesterday, was enough to bring down his entire network. Judges, politicians, police officials, military contractors. The corruption went deeper than anyone imagined." Daniel absorbed this information slowly, still struggling to believe that their desperate gamble had actually succeeded. "And us, are we safe?" Sophia's smile was radiant as she leaned down to kiss his forehead. "We're free, Daniel. All of us. For the first time in my life, I don't have to look over my shoulder or worry about my father's reach. We're actually free." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of healing, both physical and emotional. Daniel's recovery was slow but steady, aided by the knowledge that his sacrifice had protected the people he loved. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, but the blood loss and trauma had nearly killed him anyway. Tommy visited every day, regaling his father with stories of his adventures with Lily and Martha. The two children had formed an unbreakable bond during the crisis, and Daniel could see that his son was thriving in ways he hadn't since Sarah's death. "She's like the little sister I always wanted," Tommy confided one afternoon as they watched Lily play with a puzzle on the hospital room floor. "And Sophia, she's really nice, Dad. She reminds me of Mom sometimes." The observation was delivered with the innocent honesty that only children possessed, but it carried profound implications. Daniel had been so focused on survival and justice that he hadn't fully processed what was happening between him and Sophia. But watching her with the children, seeing her strength and kindness and fierce protectiveness, he realized that what had started as mutual protection had grown into something deeper. When the federal prosecutors finally finished taking their statements, when the last of Blackwell's associates had been arrested, when the media circus had moved on to other stories, Daniel and Sophia found themselves alone in his hospital room, finally able to speak honestly about what had happened between them. "So," Sophia said quietly, settling into the chair beside his bed that had become her permanent fixture. "What happens now?" Daniel considered the question carefully. 3 weeks ago, he had been a single father struggling to build a future for his son. Now he was part of something larger, something that felt like the family he had lost when Sarah died. "Now we figure out how to build a life together," he said simply, "if that's what you want." Sophia's smile was answer enough, but she gave him words anyway. "Daniel Carter, you saved my life and my daughter's life. You gave up everything to help strangers in a storm. You faced down monsters and bullets and nearly died protecting us. If that's not love, I don't know what is." "It's love," Daniel confirmed, reaching out to take her hand. "But it's more than that. It's family. It's choosing to stand together against whatever comes next." 6 months later, Daniel stood in the garden, behind the house they had bought together, in a small town far from the city where their nightmare had begun. It was Saturday morning, and the autumn air carried the scent of coffee and pancakes from the kitchen where Sophia was making breakfast for their unconventional family. Tommy and Lily played in the fallen leaves, their laughter echoing across the yard as they built the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. The boy who had lost his mother too young and the girl who had never known safety were now siblings in every way that mattered, protected by parents who understood the price of the life they had built together. "Dad," Tommy called out, running toward him with Lily close behind. "Sophia says breakfast is ready and she made your favorite pancakes." Daniel scooped Lily up in his arms, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and kissed his cheek with the unconscious affection of a child who had never doubted his love. "Uncle Daniel," she said seriously, "Mama says we're going to be a real family now. Is that true?" "We've been a real family for a while now, sweetheart," Daniel replied, carrying her toward the house where Sophia waited in the doorway, beautiful and radiant in the morning light. "Now we're just making it official." The wedding was small and simple, held in the backyard of their new home, with Sheriff Morrison officiating and Martha providing a cake that was more love than flour and sugar. Tommy stood as Daniel's best man, while Lily served as Sophia's maid of honor, both children beaming with pride at their crucial roles in the ceremony. As Daniel and Sophia exchanged vows, they had written themselves promising to protect and cherish each other and the children they both loved. The shadows of the past finally seemed to lift completely. Edmund Blackwell was serving multiple life sentences in federal prison. Richard Morse was dead. The network of corruption that had poisoned their city for decades had been dismantled piece by piece through the evidence that Sophia's grandmother had so carefully preserved. But more importantly, from the ashes of trauma and loss, something beautiful had grown. A family forged not by blood or obligation, but by choice and sacrifice and the kind of love that transformed ordinary people into heroes. That evening, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a storm and a stranger's cry for help. It had led through darkness and danger, through choices that had seemed impossible and odds that had appeared insurmountable. "Any regrets?" Sophia asked quietly, her hand finding his as they watched their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Daniel considered the question seriously. His old life had been simpler, safer, more predictable. He had traded quiet security for uncertainty and risked peaceful routine for the chaos of building something new. "Not one," he said finally, and meant it completely. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains, promising another storm to wash the world clean. But this time Daniel felt no fear of what the darkness might bring. He had learned that some storms weren't disasters to be endured, but opportunities to discover what really mattered. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the Carter family gathered on their porch, safe in the shelter they had built together. Tommy and Lily pressed close to their parents, while Daniel and Sophia held each other against the wind, their love a beacon that no storm could extinguish. And in the warm glow of their home, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Daniel finally understood the truth his late wife had tried to teach him, that family wasn't just about the people you were born with, but about the people you chose to protect, to cherish, and to love through whatever storms life might bring. The rain continued to fall, but inside their circle of light and love all was well. The storm had passed, and in its wake it had left something precious beyond measure, a family complete and unbroken, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.